and welcome to today's video on how to grow squash and zucchini from seeds. Squash and zucchini are delicious and versatile vegetables that are easy to grow in your own backyard. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the steps to successfully plant and grow squash and zucchini from seeds. My name is Jara, and I teach others how to garden and grow your own food, raise backyard chickens, and keep bees. If these topics interest you, make sure you subscribe to my channel as I post about them on a daily basis. Let's talk about cultivar selection because there's a lot of different varieties to choose from when you're buying your seeds. The first one you'll see is summer squash. That's the soft-bodied squashes like zucchinis. The second is winter squash, also known as storage squash. These are like squash or pumpkins that have hard exteriors, which make them great for long-term storage. Examples include Seminole pumpkins or calabaza squash. The cucurbitaceae family is a large one, and there are several species. If they are in the same species, they can cross-pollinate. So the cucurbita pepo is like your summer squashes, scalloped or patty pan squash, and pumpkins, also most winter squashes. Cucurbita moscata is like tromboncino rapicante or Seminole pumpkins. Cucurbita maxima are like banana squashes or the blue Hubbard squash. By the way, I have tons of seeds for all of these different cultivars on my website, so if you need any, go check it out. What are some of your favorite zucchini and squash varieties? Please let me know in the comments below because I like to experiment with different varieties every season. By the way, none of these squash cultivars can cross-pollinate with cucumbers, cantaloupes, or watermelon because all of those crops are in completely different groups, so no worries. And I have one awesome tip when it comes to cultivar selection. If you struggle with squash bugs, the dreaded vine borers, or worms, choose cultivars in the Cucurbita moscata family. These plants are extra tough with hard vines and exteriors, so it's more difficult for these pests to chew or bore their way into these plants. I'm not saying you're not going to get the pests, it's just that these plants have a higher resistance, so they can take on a lot more damage before it actually affects them. I still recommend that you treat for the pests and plant trap crops like sunflowers or blue Hubbard squash to help with the issue. All right, let's talk about sowing your seeds. You can start direct sowing seeds in early spring as soon as all danger of frost is past. Squash and zucchini are warm season vegetables, so you'll want to wait until the soil has warmed up to at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit before planting your seeds. To sow your seeds, make a small hole in the soil about an inch deep and about 2 to 3 feet apart because these plants get really big. Just put 1 or 2 seeds in each hole, cover it with some soil, and water them in. They germinate pretty quickly, usually in about 5 days. To get a head start on your season, you could start seeds indoors about 6 weeks before your last average spring frost date. I like to sow seeds for squash, pumpkins, anything that's big in minimum a 4-inch container like this one right here, or even better, a solo cup, because this is big enough to house these seedlings until they're ready to be transplanted without having to waste your time potting up. If you're in a warmer zone like zones 8 and up, I'm in Florida, I'm zone 9B, you can grow these crops twice a year, once in spring and again in fall. So for a fall sowing, I like to start my seeds in July to transplant them in around August. So today I'm going to sow some seeds for one of my favorites. This is called tromboncino rapicante. It is massive and it produces these squashes that are big and long. They look just like baseball bats. What I love about these is when you harvest them young, when the skin is still green, you can use it just like zucchini. It's tender, and in my opinion, it has even a better texture and flavor than regular zucchini. Or you can wait until the squashes ripen up on the vine and their rind turns basically a tan color like butternut squash. The shell at that point has hardened up pretty well, and you can use it as a storage squash. It'll store for at least 3 months. So very versatile variety to grow in your garden. I like to plant 2 seeds per container. Just like that, you want to push them in about 1 inch deep and just cover with some soil. Here's some Seminole pumpkin that I started 6 weeks ago. These are ready to be transplanted. You know they're ready to transplant when you look at the bottom and you can see some roots coming out. If you take it out, you can see that it has a very good, well-developed root system. As soon as these seedlings germinate, usually in around 5 days, they will require light. So if you're doing this indoors, you might have to put them under some grow lights. In my case, I use shop lights because these are very inexpensive and they work just as well as grow lights. The only thing is make sure that you buy shop lights that are at least 5,000 kelvins or above. That's for the daylight range. You'll notice that when most things sprout, the first 2 set of leaves are called cotyledons, and then from there the seedling will grow its next set of leaves, which are called the true leaves or the adult leaves. Once your seedling has its first set of true leaves or adult leaves, you can start fertilizing. I recommend just an all-purpose general liquid fertilizer, or you can use fish fertilizer. When fertilizing seedlings, just make sure that you mix the fertilizer at half the strength of whatever the directions say. This fish fertilizer says 2 tablespoons per gallon of water. So for my seedlings, I'm going to use 1 tablespoon per gallon of water. And I think it's so important to fertilize your seedlings as soon as you can because it promotes rapid, healthy, strong growth. Now, I have to admit, it took me a couple years to finally figure out how to properly grow squash seedlings to get them to survive once I transplant in my garden, because they attract a lot of pests and diseases. But don't worry, I'm going to tell you what to do about that issue so that you can get your plants to survive, be healthy, and produce a lot of squash for you. Probably the most common thing you're going to get with your seedlings is worm damage, because the worms love to eat the tender baby leaves of any kind of squash plant. If you notice these leaves look munched on, please treat for it immediately. Those worms can eat these plants up really, really quick, and then your seedlings will die. For any kind of worm damage, I like to use BT. It stands for Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacteria type of spray, so this is considered an organic type of treatment. If you want to get the same one that I use, you can follow the link to Amazon below in the description. How this works is when you spray the bacteria on these leaves, the worms will eat the leaves, therefore ingest the bacteria. The bacteria disrupts their digestive system and it effectively kills the worms. Spray at the first signs of any kind of munched up looking leaves, because this little baby seedling here can't handle too much of that, and you want this to survive until the plant is big enough to be transplanted in your garden. You can also hand pick the worms. Most likely you won't have too many on a little seedling like this. You could just squish them if you prefer. But just in my experience, in my Florida garden, we have monstrous worms, okay, in large number. There is no way I can keep up with hand picking the worms. So for me to grow not just squash but other crops like cucumbers and melons, I really have to use something like this BT spray. Some of you have reported to me that you don't have a lot of worms in your garden. That is awesome. You are very lucky, but some of us not so much. So the main goal with these seedlings is to get them to survive so you can plant them in your garden, and then they'll start growing larger, mature sized leaves that the pests actually don't like as much, because those mature leaves are thicker, harder, even a little spikier, and they tend to leave it more so alone than these tender baby greens. All right, so let me show you how to transplant your seedlings once they're ready. So hopefully you've picked a nice, bright, sunny spot with really good soil that has a lot of organic matter. You're just gonna dig a hole about twice the size of your seedling. Whenever I'm transplanting something, I always sprinkle a little bit of fertilizer into the planting hole. Just use whatever granular fertilizer that you have. I really like to use organic granular fertilizer because it's gentle on my plants and it won't burn them. Mix the fertilizer into the soil just a little bit. Then pop your seedling out and transplant it. All set. It's really important to mulch around the base to conserve water and prevent diseases that live in the soil from backsplashing onto the leaves, and it also helps to discourage pests. Another common question that I see, especially with beginner gardeners, is thinking that this natural silvery variegation on the leaves is powdery mildew. Actually, a lot of squash varieties and even pumpkins have a natural silvery variegation on their leaves, and that is totally fine. It's indicative of a healthy plant. Here's an example of what powdery mildew looks like. As you can see, it's more of a spotted type of pattern, and it is powdery. If you rub it, you might even see some of the spores float around in the air. I have one treatment for powdery mildew, and basically all diseases that are caused by pathogens that live and spread on the leaves. And that's 1 cup of hydrogen peroxide mixed per gallon of water. You just spray it maybe once every 5 to 7 days, and you'll notice that it cleans and disinfects the leaves. And here's another tip for you, especially if you have a small garden like me. These squash plants get huge. Don't let these little baby seedlings fool you. For example, the Seminole pumpkin that I grow sprawls out and can get as long as like 25 feet vines. So for someone like me with a small garden, I have quite a few raised garden beds and I plant a lot in grow bags. It's very smart to plant your vining type squashes on the edges of your raised beds or the grow bags like this one here, so that they can set their roots in there but then grow outside of it and sprawl in the area surrounding it. This right here is Georgia candy roaster squash. It gets big squashes that can be over 25 pounds. If you're looking for a cultivar that produces a high volume of food, go for something like the Georgia candy roasters, Guatemalan blue squash, or the pink banana squash. Growing squash and zucchini from seeds is easy and can provide you with a bountiful harvest for many weeks. By following these simple tips, I hope you can successfully grow your own squash and zucchini right in your own backyard. Thanks for watching and happy gardening.